Today's event is hosted by a number of local chambers and business groups, including the Jefferson County Economic Development Corporation, West Metro Chamber of Commerce, Golden Chamber of Commerce, the Westminster Chamber of Commerce, Metro North Chamber of Commerce, Arvada Chamber of Commerce, the Wheat Ridge Chamber of Commerce, the Wheat Ridge Business Association, the Conifer Chamber of Commerce, the Evergreen Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Applewood Business Association. Most of these groups make up the Jefferson County Business Lobby, known as the JCBL. The JCBL uses their combined resources to develop positions on legislation, craft policy, and communicate with legislators on key issues that impact businesses in Jefferson County and throughout the state. We are proud to support our businesses through this impactful coalition supported by lobbyist Jeff Wiest. We would like to take a moment this morning to welcome our many distinguished guests who have joined us today. Would the following leaders please stand to be recognized? We appreciate you holding your applause until the end. Lakewood Mayor Adam Paul, Adams County Commissioner Chaz Tedesco, Adams County Manager Ray Gonzalez, Arvada City Council members John Marriott, Mark McGough, Nancy Ford, David Jones, and Dot Miller. Golden City Council Laura Weinberg, State Representative Tracy Kraft Tharp, Jefferson County Clerk and Recorder Faye Griffin, Red Rocks Community College President Dr. Michelle Haney, Representative Polis, Treasurer Stapleton, as well as we have the Arvada High School Students Career Explorers. If I missed anyone else, please stand to be recognized as well. Thank you very much for your service. This event would not have been possible without the incredible support of the Denver Regional Council of Governments. It is my pleasure to welcome Executive Director Douglas Rex to the stage to welcome you all on behalf of Dr. Cog.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I also would like to thank the chambers within Adams and Jefferson counties for hosting this important event. How many here are familiar with Dr. Cog? Hopefully, both of the candidates, I hope their hands are up, wherever they are. As long as those are good. Well, that was, I'm always surprised how many do know more about Dr. Cog than I think you probably should normally. But I'll keep this brief, though. I mean, I do want to take this opportunity just to give you a little bit of information about our organization. The Denver Regional Council of Governments is a voluntary association of local governments across the 10 metro area counties, and its purpose is to work on important regional issues, and that's something we've been doing at Dr. Cog since 1955. Important issues such as transportation and mobility, growth and development, and aging and disabled services. Our board is made up of 59 elected officials from across the region, and you'll be pleased to note that I know we're in Arvada. I don't know if Councilman Pfeiffer is in the room. He's our current vice chair. Councilman Pfeiffer is. So if you see him, he's not here. We'll hunt him down later. So we're of course very pleased to sponsor this important discussion today, and like you, we're very interested to hear how the candidates plan to approach the challenges presented by the rapid growth in the region and state, including traffic and the resultant congestion. We all know all too well about that. Housing and our economy, the crossroads that is, and our region's changing demographics, particularly the growth of older adults in our region. So once again, I would like to thank the chambers and all the other sponsors for hosting this important event, and please enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Cog, for your support. It is my pleasure to introduce our event moderator today. We've been doing this a little bit, Jim, haven't we? Jim Seidlicki. Jim is the Director of Public Information for Adams County. His background includes more than 2 decades as a journalist, including 15 years as a television news anchor. Jim and his wife, Kim, live in Thornton with their 3 children. Jim has graciously hosted candidate forums in Jefferson County for almost 5 years, always offering a lively and fair conversation. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Jim Seidlecki.
Thank you, Michael, and I want to thank everybody who has invited me back to host this event. It's always a pleasure to be able to facilitate conversations that are so incredibly important to all of us and the future of our state. We appreciate that all of you have joined us, and the goal here is to better understand the issues and obviously these two candidates. We know it's been a long journey for both candidates, and we're grateful that they have joined us today with only a couple weeks left of this campaign. On your tables, we have provided a list of the questions that will be asked and a bit more information on each candidate. Feel free to use this sheet and take notes if it's helpful for you. It is now my pleasure to invite both candidates up to the stage. While they make their way up, I'll give you an overview of today's process. Mr. Stapleton, Mr. Polis, thank you very much. Each candidate will receive 5-minute opening statements, followed by a series of questions submitted by a variety of community partners, and finally, they will end up with 2-minute closing remarks. We will notify candidates by holding up a sign when they have limited time remaining, and then again when their time is up. We have a lot to cover today. We appreciate both candidates respecting time parameters, and in addition, we ask that the audience, all of you, are respectful of the candidates' perspectives and do not make comments, boos, or cheers around any of their responses. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining me up here. We'll start today with a coin toss. That'll be easy enough to go for the first spot in opening remarks. I have with me here a Colorado Air and Spaceport coin on one side. Adams County is extremely proud of Colorado Air and Spaceport. And on the other side is the state of Colorado flag. Who's calling it in the air?
I'll call the flag side.
Flag side. Flag side it is. Mr. Stapleton, you can choose whether you'd like to go first.
I'll let Congressman Polis go first.
Congressman Polis, 5-minute opening remarks.
And where's the timekeeper? Just so I know where to
Timekeeper is this time straight ahead of us.
Oh, great. Well, I want to thank the Arvada Chamber, our friends from the various municipalities here in Jefferson County, our friends in Adams County. It's been an honor for me to have represented much of Adams County during my first couple terms, and of course to represent much of the unincorporated areas here in Jefferson County, including Evergreen and Conifer and Morrison. A little bit of the outskirts of Littleton, not the city, but outside of Ken Carroll area and down by the Waterton campus of Lockheed. It's been an honor to represent both Jefferson County and Adams County as your representative, working with my good friend and colleague Ed Perlmutter as well. I want to thank a lot of friends. I got to say hi to some of you before we got here. And many of you know me well, but I'll tell you a little bit about my background. Many of you know, of course, like most of you, I've been a chamber member for decades, launching my first business while I was in college. I started with two friends I met through college. It was an internet access provider back in those early days of internet access with dial-up modems. We started I think we got together in '93. We launched in '94. Wound up raised capital, wound up growing that company and selling it, started several others, Pro Flowers, co-founded BlueMountain.com, and then helped get our startup ecosystem going in Colorado, co-founded Techstars, now in a couple dozen cities, and which was is an accelerator for early stage, like 1 to 3 person businesses, helping to get to the point where they can raise professionally managed capital. And then on the nonprofit side, Patriot Boot Camp, now in its 6th year, which trains veterans and military spouses with the skills they need to be self-employed and start their own businesses. I'm passionate about the capital formation end. I'll probably get back to that. But when it comes to starting a business and for small businesses, it's important, the hard skills you need, meaning you need to be able to understand, basic levels of accounting and managing a budget, how to have employees in the HR side, especially when you're a small business. You don't have the luxury of having an HR department or an accounting department, or necessarily being able to afford an outside accountant. So you got to learn those basics. That's what we've always tried to do in kind of the accelerator side. And then also it's about the mentorship and the networking side for skills. So how do you work with other people and meet other people who've been there? That's what chambers have done for decades, right? And I've been part of, everything from the brown bag luncheons to morning mixers. And it's about not just establishing those business relationships. And yes, there's clearly leads groups that many chambers operate in terms of actual sales and marketing, but it's also about who to call when you face an issue in your business and learning from others who have faced a similar issue. I'm particularly passionate about the capital formation end. I want to remove barriers to capital formation here in Colorado. We can do a better job making sure that companies of all sizes are able to access capital markets. We'd love to have more growth capital and venture capital based here in Colorado, as well as be more attractive to the capital from both coasts for deployment. And a lot of our agenda is geared towards how do we make Colorado more competitive. We'll talk about education. That's the human capital side. How do we make sure not only do we do a great job at our universities, which we do at CSU and CU and UNC, but how do we make sure that that is more affordable for people so that people can access that level of education? And then for the kids who aren't going to college, how do we make sure that they get the job skills that they need to survive in an emerging 21st century economy? Jefferson County School District has the McLean for the vocational training. But how do we, either through relationships with community colleges like Red Rocks and Front Range, have dual and concurrent enrollment programs where students can get access to really skills they need to not just to get by, but to thrive in the 21st century economy, even graduating high school with an associate's degree. And I'm excited to see many of the early college programs in high schools across Colorado that do that, as well as traditional apprenticeships like union apprenticeships, and then new wave apprenticeships like CareerWise, which while students are juniors and seniors, place them in jobs for a day or 2 a week where they actually get the skills they need, often resulting in a job offer when they matriculate. So we can do a better job making sure that we have the workforce that's ready for success. We'll delve into a lot of those issues. That's a little bit about me and what excites me. Once again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Polis. 5 minutes now for Mr. Stapleton.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I would be remiss if I didn't point out my running mate, Lang Sias, Arvada's own Lang Sias right there, who is in his hometown, and 3 kids, product of the Arvada Public Schools. Yesterday, I got to enjoy my daughter Olivia's 5th birthday. It was a very interesting occasion because we had a clown and we had some characters that showed up, Jack Sparrow and Ariel, the mermaid. And my son had to take a time out. He's 10. He started heckling the clown. And the clown turned to me and said, "Don't worry, I get heckled regularly by boys over the age of 10 and above." All I could think about, we had about 40 preschool kids running around in our backyard. And as a result, my 5-year-old got a massive stack of gifts. And all I could think about is that there are hours and hours of assembly ahead to actually make these gifts come to light, and and I'm not a great toy assembler. I'll be honest with you. I am, as many of you know, the treasurer of Colorado in my 2nd term as treasurer. When I announced for governor in September, I was the longest-serving statewide elected Republican, the only person in a crowd of 16 candidates for governor that had run and won not once but twice statewide. This has been, in many ways, a long-running reality TV series. I'm not sure if my wife would say a good or a bad one. But during my time as treasurer, I've worked collaboratively on some of the most important economic policy issues Colorado has faced. A couple years ago, I was the leader of the effort statewide to defeat Amendment 64, which was a $1 billion tax increase for education. I made the point that as a father of 3 school-aged kids, I wanted to make sure that if Coloradans were being asked for a $1 billion tax increase, that the money actually ended up in the classrooms where it belonged, to improve student-teacher ratios, improve technology, ultimately compensate teachers more, and not be siphoned off to backfill a massive unfunded liability with respect to our public pension system. 2 years ago, I was again the leader of an effort with Governor Bill Ritter statewide, the co-chairman of the Denver Chamber's effort to defeat Amendment 69, a state-run single-payer health care system that Congressman Polis supports now. And the reason we work together to defeat that is that Governor Ritter and myself knew that the associated payroll tax was going to be double digits on all businesses. That was just a start. There was going to be an additional corporate tax, an additional capital gains tax, an additional tax on businesses not domiciled in Colorado, and very quickly, every business from Pizza Hut to Merrill Lynch would no longer be doing business, to Grease Monkey would no longer be doing business in the state of Colorado. And it's not the healthcare future I wanted for our state, for my kids, for your kids, and for future generations. I've also consistently been the loudest voice for reforming our public pension system. We took a large step to doing so in the last legislative session, thanks to the bipartisan leadership provided by my running mate, Lang Sias. But for my entire time as treasurer, the pension system has been the largest unfunded liability we've had in state government, and it has continued to drain dollars from Colorado's 178 school districts, from our cities. And collectively, if all of us as Coloradans want the way of life that I think we do, we need to fix this system for the long term so that we can make promises to Colorado's 500,000 workers that we can deliver on. Thank you.
Please keep your...
I've come out with a detailed plan to keep Colorado's economy going strong. I was one of the earliest supporters of the federal tax plan, which 73% of Coloradans are benefiting from. If you make $60,000, your federal tax bill has gone from $1,700 to $100. We repealed the individual mandate for health insurance, which 150,000 Coloradans had to pay because they couldn't afford health insurance. 80% of those have a household income of $50,000 or less. Economists are saying it will bring Colorado $1 billion plus this year to our budget. I hope a good portion of that money should go to fixing our roads and infrastructure. I've also talked about 3 other funding mechanisms so that we can solve our infrastructure challenges for the long term in Colorado. I've talked about a healthcare system that invests in mental health, that improves access and affordability for young people, that streamlines our healthcare needs, and I've talked about a plan to keep more dollars in the classroom. This will contrast greatly with Congressman Polis's plan, which would involve $90 billion in costs or spending and triple the size of Colorado's budget obligations. And as treasurer, I can tell you the only way to pay for that is through taxes on individuals or taxes on business. Either one would make Colorado a difficult place to live and to work in for my kids and for yours. Thanks, and for any kids you care about, even if you don't have kids. Thanks for having me.
All right, we want to thank both candidates, and we will move to a question and answer period now. You will each have up to 2 minutes to answer each question. We're going to add in some lighter questions throughout the forum through our fire round. These questions require answers that are less than a sentence, but more than a word. I think we can all agree on that being around 8 to 10 seconds. We're going to do our best to get through all of the listed questions, but may make some adjustments if needed based on time, and we'll start this round in alphabetical order and alternate throughout the questions. So Representative Polis, you'll have the first question. This is a question about aging submitted by Dr. Cog, and we are all getting old. No one's any younger than they were when they walked through the door today. And while I know you two gentlemen have likely added a gray hair or two over the last year, let's begin this afternoon with a question related to Colorado's over 60 population. The demographic is growing at the 3rd fastest rate in America, and the increasing older populations has implications for healthcare, housing, transportation, community development, caregiving, and the workforce, among others. So, Mr. Polis, what do you think the state should do in addition to its existing efforts to ensure that older adults in Colorado are able to age with dignity in their homes and communities?
Well, you know, for some men as they age, their hair turns gray. I haven't experienced that yet, but it's thinning. It's thinning severely. So that's the other sign of age that we're seeing. So we're getting there, whether it's thinner or grayer or both. But you know, this is the fastest growing demographic in Colorado. So I'm really glad you asked this question. And too often, a lot of the policies that are meant for our older citizens neglect the importance of just everyday important issues. So like transportation, able to age in place in your home and affordable housing, making sure that property taxes, because of increasing assessments, don't go up so fast that they force people from their home. I'm proud to have a comprehensive policy for aging Coloradans on our website at polisforcolorado.com. I just want to go into a couple of the details today. One of them is improving transportation options that meet the needs of aging Coloradans. And what that often means is, as we're looking at investing in our roads and our bridges, we also have to look at alternative forms of transportation that provide freedom of transportation to commuters, saving them money, but are also available to our seniors, including buses, bus rapid transit, including rail from the suburbs linking into the existing light rail system in Denver, and as well as ride sharing. So we really need to look at how people can get to the places they love in our golden years. We also want to make sure that the property rent heat tax credit indexing the rebate amounts for inflation, so older adults on fixed income can continue to live in the homes they know. I think we can make better use of the homestead tax exemption towards that end, and making sure that nobody's forced out of their home just because of the reality of rising assessments, which we all know about and is a sign of a strong economy, but for somebody on a fixed income is not good. I think we have a big contrast between Walker and I on para. I strongly support the defined benefits of para. I support making it actuarially sound for today's and tomorrow's seniors, because I know that seniors don't have variable expenses. You know what your expenses are? You've worked hard, you've paid in, you deserve what you were promised.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. Mr. Stapleton, let's go with the same question to you. What do you think the state should do, in addition to existing efforts, to ensure that older adults in Colorado can age with dignity in their homes and communities?
Well, first of all, next week my grandmother turns 99. She is in a nursing home, and I was happy to have a meeting last week with the Colorado Healthcare Association, which represents approximately 201 of the 209 nursing homes in Colorado. And there was a very productive bipartisan effort 2 years ago on aging in Colorado, which talked about aging at home, which is ultimately something that saves individuals money, it saves families money, it ultimately saves taxpayers as well, and making sure, along with the ability to age at home, that we have the resources to provide more attainable housing for seniors, more services for seniors in that housing, in terms of access points, in terms of extra care that they may need. And it really needs to be a collaborative effort. I do have disagreements with Congressman Polis because, as many of you in this room know, that he was the federal sponsor of Bernie Care, which is a universal Medicare system, and believes that we should have this universal Medicare system at the state level here in Colorado. And the most vulnerable are our grandparents and our aging parents and the World War II generation. The problem is when you expand Medicare, and most of our aging seniors begin the journey to a nursing home, if they start that journey on Medicare, chances are in a very short period of time they will be on Medicaid because they will have blown through all of their savings. And the expansion of Medicare doesn't provide any long-term care or resources for the most vulnerable among us. And it's why the Kaiser Family Foundation looked at Congressman Polis and Senator Sanders' proposal and said in Colorado alone, 300,000 Medicare recipients would be put at risk. That is not a system I want for my grandmother nearing her 99th birthday. It's not a compassionate system. It's an empty government promise that takes it out on the most vulnerable Coloradans, and that is our aging seniors.
Mr. Stapleton, we'll keep this question with you to lead off. We're talking about homelessness, and this is submitted by Family Tree. By many available data points and through observation, individuals and families experiencing homelessness are increasing in Jefferson County and really throughout the metro region. What's the best solution to address the issue of homelessness in our state, and whose responsibility should it be to implement that solution? Is there a solution that has a centralized management component, and if so, where does that live?
Well, it needs to be a collaborative effort, and one of the saddest statistics is that just 2 years ago in Colorado, we had the largest spike of any state in the country of veterans who have become homeless. I think that if you go and serve your country, it should be incumbent on the state of Colorado to make sure that you get back on your feet and can lead a productive life. And it's really tragic to see what's going on. And I think a lot of our homeless population are unfortunately also suffering from drug addiction, whether it be opioids or crystal meth or heroin or crack to a larger extent. And if you talk to law enforcement, they'll tell you the same thing. And what we've done a very poor job of doing in the state of Colorado is investing in mental health and rehabilitative resources. And that needs to be a collaborative effort between the state of Colorado and municipalities, because what is happening is individuals on the streets are committing crimes as a byproduct of their desire to get drugs, and then they are going through the county system. They are offered no rehabilitative or mental health services. They get transferred to state prisons, and through misguided parole policies over the last 8 years under this governor, they are released after 30 days, and they are still not given any rehabilitative or mental health services, and they go right back onto the street, and the cost cycle starts over again at the county level. And so we need to improve that. I have a difference with Congressman Polis. He's talked about expanding recreational drugs. I do not believe that mental health issues or homelessness are direct root cause of marijuana, but I also don't think that marijuana helps somebody who is struggling with mental health issues and is homeless. In fact, I would say that it does not. And so we need to do a better job investing in mental health resources and rehabilitative resources if we're going to have the Colorado that's compassionate to veterans and the homeless. And we need to work with nonprofits like my friend who started Bridge House, which is a skills-based training program actually in Boulder, to get people back on their feet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Mr. Polis, I'll recap the question, Best solution to address the issue of homelessness in our state. Whose responsibility should it be to implement your proposed solution? And is there one that includes a centralized management component? Where would that live?
So, and I first want to address, and I think many of you know this, but I also did not support Amendment 69. I felt it would have driven up healthcare costs, and nothing that I support at the state level would affect Medicare. It's actually a linchpin of what we need if we ever care about achieving universal health care in Colorado. Of course we rely on Medicare. It's not perfect. I think they should be allowed to negotiate for prescription drug rates, but thankfully we value the Medicare that we have today as a linchpin of what we need to accomplish in terms of making sure that we save businesses money and save individuals money. This issue is personal for me. I co-founded a charter school for homeless youth in Denver, Academy of Urban Learning. My mother, Susan Polishutz, is a tireless advocate for homeless. She recently made a documentary about a homeless choir that's aired on Rocky Mountain PBS. And I agree with Governor Hickenlooper that we need to invest in addressing behavioral health needs and including marijuana dollars to expand opportunities for affordable housing. And I'm not sure, obviously I don't support more recreational drugs. I'm not sure what that means. I do believe that regulating marijuana rather than having it in an underground market with drug dealers is safer, can reduce drug abuse, and help keep marijuana out of the hands of minors. Also generating tax revenue, which can go to, of course, school capital construction, but yes, also mental health and preventing homelessness. We need to look at new affordable housing opportunities. Obviously, one of the biggest drivers of homelessness, in addition to mental health and substance abuse, is very simply the high cost of housing. I mean, I would challenge any of you to try to get a $12 an hour job and be able to afford to live anywhere close to where those jobs are. It's very challenging because of the lack of affordable housing. We would partner with state-owned land, with a dedicated funding source for the State Affordable Housing Fund, with local governments, cities and counties, to help make sure there's more affordable housing opportunities close to where the jobs are, which also helps reduce traffic on the roads, rather than having people living further and further away from where the jobs are.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. Keep that mic handy. We're on to an economic development question. You'll have the first crack at this, submitted by the Economic Development Council of Colorado. Colorado has seen robust economic growth since the recession, particularly along the Front Range, and strong population growth has come along with it. However, a recent editorial by the Denver Post stated that Colorado should take its foot off the economic accelerator. Do you agree with the statement? How would you communicate your position about economic growth with the people of Colorado, especially the areas that are not going to agree with your views? Because I think we all know some folks love the growth and some folks would like to hit the brakes.
Very, very clearly we should keep our foot on the pedal. Growth is good. The challenge we have with growth is we need to make it work for those of us already here. Because I hear from so many families in the Denver metro area, yes, you may have a job and maybe you got a 3% raise, but what does that mean if your rent's gone up 8% a year or your healthcare costs have gone up 12% a year? So the challenge is to make sure that this amazing economic engine of growth that we've had under Governor Ritter and Governor Hickenlooper, and I will continue, works better for those of us already here. Because we need to do something, and we'll get to the transportation, about traffic. I mean, what does it mean for not only our quality of life if your 15-minute commute is now a 35-minute commute, but the lost productivity. A study estimated that there's $600 a year in your time lost and extra wear and tear in your vehicle just being stuck in the additional traffic over the last couple decades. How do we make sure that people can afford to live close to where the jobs are? So we want transit plan communities. We want to bring together, through Dr. Cog and others, all the regional governments to make sure we have planning for both where the jobs are and where people will be able to live to occupy them. In the face of this growth, it's also very critical that we have a governor that will stand up for our parks, our open space, our public lands that are not only an inherent part of our identity as Coloradans and Westerners, and we enjoy them with your kids or your grandkids for hunting and fishing and hiking and biking, but they're also an important economic driver of our state in terms of the outdoor tourism and recreation industry. So for me, it's not about letting up. It's about how do we make this momentum work for you, work for small businesses, work for individuals, reduce your costs on healthcare, reduce your costs on early childhood education, and make sure that preschool or kindergarten are available for kids. So we're going to have a agenda that's focused from the ground up on saving people money, so you have a little bit more in your pocket and paycheck at the end of every month to enjoy the Colorado you love, and making sure that this growth improves the quality of life for businesses and individuals who are already here.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. Mr. Stapleton, same question. Should Colorado take its foot off the economic accelerator? And how will you explain, if you have time in 2 minutes, how will you explain your position to folks who may not agree with your stance?
Well, I think we need to keep our foot right squarely planted on the gas. But the fact of the matter is we're not going to have the growth that all of us want to have unless it's sustainable, managed growth. We're not going to be able to compete for Fortune 500 companies like Amazon unless we solve infrastructure over the long term, which is why I put out a detailed plan, and the only candidate who's put out a detailed plan to fund our transportation, not just on an incremental basis, but over the long term. To provide attainable housing, I use the term attainable versus affordable because what may be affordable for somebody in the metro area is not necessarily attainable for somebody on the western slope or Pueblo. We also need to work, the next governor needs to work with the governor's Office of Economic Development to point out communities outside of the metro area for businesses that may want to locate down to Pueblo or to the western slope that may be priced out of the metro area because of the massive growth that it's undertaken. I'm a big believer that growth equals jobs and jobs equal growth. It's why I supported the federal tax plan, which I would argue has done more to provide record unemployment to Colorado and other states. It has provided it will provide 126 economic opportunity zones. More of those, more than half of those are in rural Colorado for tax incentivized investing in rural parts of our state. Congressman Polis disagrees with me. He wants to repeal the federal tax plan, which takes much needed money out of Colorado's budget. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. And finally, we need a governor who shows up. I've been everywhere as treasurer, all 64 counties, been to rural areas of our state, and we need to have a holistic approach to economic development which involves funding broadband and making sure that companies recognize that there's a world outside of Metro Denver that they can relocate in. Thank you.
We have some fire round questions now. We are going to ask 3 to Mr. Stapleton, the same 3 to Mr. Polis. We'll stick with 3 with each candidate. What one word describes the tone you will set if you are elected as Colorado's next governor? Mr. Stapleton.
Pragmatic.
If you could have coffee with a famous person, dead or alive, who would that be?
President Bush, 41.
What was the last book that you read?
Grit, Angela Duckworth.
Good stuff. Now on to Mr. Polis. Best describes you, the one word and the tone that you will set as Colorado's next governor.
Innovative.
If you could have coffee with a famous person, dead or alive, who would that be?
Abraham Lincoln.
And the last book that you read?
Ken Follett, Edge of Eternity.
Okay. Thank you for the quick answers on those and respecting the parameters. We're flying right along. Education and workforce question. This one is submitted by Colorado Succeeds. Mr. Polis will answer first. Earlier this year, a number of business groups partnered with Colorado Succeeds and Common Sense Policy Roundtable to ask the question, what if Colorado schools were ranked #1? The survey showed that 86% of employers find the skills gap to be a threat to their business. If elected as our next governor, how would you address Colorado's skills gap so that more employers remain, expand operations, and invest in our state?
So this is so important because in addition to financial capital, human capital is critical for the success of the business sector. We need to make sure that companies that are looking at locating in Colorado feel that they're able to hire the skills and talent that they need to be able to succeed. And we need to make people sure that start their own businesses have the ability to execute on their business model. We have a broad diversity of education in our state. What we need to do a better job doing is making sure that kids have access to opportunities no matter where they live. That starts with early childhood education. All the studies show that preschool and kindergarten are the most important years if we care about ending these achievement gaps based on income and race and giving kids a strong start. Walker and I can afford preschool and kindergarten for our kids. Not every family can. I plan to work with Republicans like Jim Wilson of Salida, who's long been a champion of full-day kindergarten, to fund kindergarten from the general fund, and use innovative funding models like bonding for human capital, like Pay for Success, like Westminster's done, where you can actually pay for preschool slots out of savings to the 1 through 12 education system, because when you have preschool and kindergarten, kids have lower special education rates and lower grade repetition rates. So through social impact bonds and general funds, we'll get it done. State of Oklahoma has preschool and kindergarten for every kid. I met some Oklahomans the other day and I said, you know what, we're gonna catch up with Oklahoma and do it here in Colorado. We also need to make sure that as students graduate, and I started 3 high schools in the Denver metro area. I was superintendent of New America School in Thornton, Aurora, and here in Lakewood, or nearby next door in Lakewood, helping English language learners learn English, get a high school diploma, and also get the skills they need to succeed in the workforce, obviously starting with basic numeracy and literacy. Partnerships with community colleges are absolutely critical. District workforce centers, all of these things exist in our state. I think the challenge for the next governor is how do we make sure that every kid has access to them, no matter where they live, so that kids graduate not just with a diploma, but with the skill to thrive in a 21st century economy.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. We'll ask the same question to Mr. Stapleton. We'll begin with a rephrase of the question just to refresh your memory. How will you address Colorado's skills gap so that more employers remain, expand operations, and invest in our state?
So as a father of 3 school-age kids, nothing is more important than investing in our schools. And as Treasurer of Colorado, I've worked with legislators on both sides of the aisle to just over a year ago start the first ever Land Trust Investment Board. This was a way that we actively invest about $1 billion of money, which was prior to this was invested in the Treasurer's office in fixed income. We had a bipartisan idea that if we actively invested this money in a collaborative way, the extra money could go to the Education Permanent Fund for K-12 education without raiding another area of our budget, without a tax increase. And I also was proud to work from the Treasurer's office on a Pay for Success model where school districts can hire private sector contractors, and those private sector contractors are compensated based on the money they actually save the district level. I've talked a lot about skills-based training, was endorsed by the Associated Builders and Contractors, and took a tour about 6 months ago of RK Mechanical, a big commercial HVAC installer, and the foreman said to me, you know what frustrates me most, Treasurer Stapleton, is we have nearly 5 times the number of jobs that we can fill with Colorado bodies, and they're high-paying, high-skilled jobs. We need to do a better job as a state investing in skills-based learning, especially in public schools in Colorado that are graduating at less than 50%. We're making an empty promise to young people to tell everybody that you can go to college. And my plan differs from Congressman Polis because he's offered free preschool. That's a $1 billion promise without explaining how we're going to pay for it. I would rather take an approach of promises that we can afford and not just simply use free, especially since neither he nor I support the progressive tax increase for Amendment 73. I have no idea where he's going to get that money. I want to make pragmatic promises that we can afford to make. That's why I said pragmatic, by the way, in my answer. That we can afford to make for our kids, for my kids, and for your kids, not just a bunch of empty government promises like Head Start, which show that the dollars we spend, that there's no appreciable difference in outcomes for students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. We'll begin this question with you, and this one is for the spreadsheet folks out there. Government finance folks love to talk about Gallagher. Colorado has a reputation as a relatively low-tax state, but the one exception is the high property taxes on business. The high taxes are driven by Colorado Constitution's Gallagher Amendment, which has proven politically difficult to unwind. However, Gallagher is now hitting the revenues of local governments, schools, and school districts hard, as well as special districts. How do you propose that we solve this thorny problem known as Gallagher?
Well, I'm happy to say that my friend Bob Rankin, a legislator from Western Colorado, from the Garfield County, is working right as we speak on a bipartisan initiative that I would absolutely support as governor, which is a way of modifying how Gallagher collects taxes based on residential and commercial property splits. And it is inextricably linked to education funding, as we know, and I think that this effort will hopefully be productive. I like that it's starting in the legislature because in order for us to update something like Gallagher, we need leadership on both sides to buy in to the idea that this is something that can and should be updated, that it is something that affects school funding, because if you're in the Cherry Creek School District or if you're in Pitkin County with high home values and high corresponding property taxes, you have better funding mechanisms for schools than obviously if you're in the San Luis Valley. And so this is, I think, a great bipartisan approach to solving this problem. It's not the only answer because, look, we have a structural problem in education funding in Colorado, because if you look across our 178 school districts and take numbers from the Department of Education as we've done, what you find is that the number of students has grown by 6%, the number of teachers by 8%, and administrative costs by 35% since 2011. I want to make sure that the dollars we're investing as Coloradans in the future outcomes of our public education system are being spent in the classroom to improve student-teacher ratios, to ultimately compensate teachers more, and that is not happening. And with more transparency and accountability across all of our school districts, it has a chance to. Thank you.
Mr. Polis, how do you propose we solve the thorny problem of Gallagher?
So Gallagher is unfair to businesses. It's also unfair geographically because of areas that are primarily residential. And it's also reduces our safety. It's been severely hard, as you know, on special fire districts and others directly related to our public protection. There's fire districts that are paying firefighters 30-40% less than municipal fire districts. I'm proud to be endorsed by the firefighters. I've worked on this issue of fire prevention and mitigation nationally. Where we have to start on Gallagher is what's the pain point it's addressing? Because there's a legitimate issue of making sure that with rising assessments, people aren't forced out of their homes because of rising property taxes. Now, I also like to say we did it a little better than California did. They had an answer to that problem called Prop 113, which was actually even worse than ours. What it did is it basically froze your assessment based on what you paid for your house. So if you have somebody who bought a house when it was $100,000 and now it's $800,000, you literally have a neighbor paying 8 times as much who just bought their house than somebody who's lived there 30 years. That's even less fair and more distortive than what we've done. So what we need to do is start from scratch. We need to offer the people a real solution, saying here's how you know your property tax won't go up more than you can afford. The senior homestead exemption money is certainly in that mix, as well as making sure that we aren't arbitrary geographically picking on choosing communities based on what their ratio is of commercial to residential. That's not the true pain point people feel. It's, I don't want my property tax going up. So I think we need to find a way that property tax won't go up beyond, inflation or whatever it is, and present that to people as a way to say, look, this is a better way of solving it than Gallagher. It's a better way of solving it than Prop 113 in California. It's not going to be perfect. It won't give government all the revenue. It won't mean that your assessment won't sometimes go up. But at least we can assure people that it isn't based on an arbitrary formula of the ratio of businesses to homes.
This year has been an extremely divisive year politically, both nationally and even here statewide. Mr. Polis, knowing that you need both Democrats and Republicans to work together to create good policies for Colorado, how do you plan on unifying the state to stem this tide of divisive discourse after you're elected?
Well, in addition to started several businesses, I've met payroll, I've created jobs. In addition to having started a school as superintendent, having served on the State Board of Education. And interestingly enough, education is inherently political, but not necessarily partisan, right? I mean, you know this from your Jefferson County School Board politics. It's not partisan, but it doesn't mean that our political divide isn't realized in the world of education as well, and I've always tried to bridge that. I've also been a member and a charter member of the Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress, 24 Democrats, 24 Republicans. We've rolled up our sleeves and put together real solutions to reduce healthcare costs, on transportation, on immigration, not afraid of tackling those thorny issues in a bipartisan way. I've been able to bring Republicans and Democrats together to get things done. And we need a governor, not who does the kind of name calling or accuses their opponent of supporting policies that they don't support, but who's ready to work with Republicans, independents, Democrats, and members of other parties to actually govern our state and move it forward. To me, this election isn't about liberal or conservative, left or right, or name calling. It's about forward versus backward. It's about a vision for an inclusive state that gives everybody the opportunity to succeed versus moving backward. It's about making sure we move forward with offering full-day kindergarten rather than moving backward, cutting more schools to 4-day weeks. It's about moving forward with saving businesses and individuals money on healthcare and expanding coverage rather than reducing coverage, throwing people off their healthcare and driving up rates. So as we think about where we want our state to go, Colorado has always been a forward-looking and innovative state. I hope to continue to push the envelope on innovation that saves families money and make sure that we're always moving forward as a state rather than backwards.
Mr. Stapleton, I don't know that clowns and Ariel would work on this question, but a nice party to bring folks together would be a good start. How do you plan on unifying the state and stemming the tide of divisive discourse?
Well, for the last 8 years, I've been the treasurer of Colorado. I've had no legislative authority whatsoever, and yet every single initiative that has come out of the treasurer's office has had broad bipartisan support, including giving county treasurers relief after one of the main ratings agencies downgraded U.S. Treasury bonds, passing sweeping debt consolidation across all but 2 of our state agencies to increase the accountability and transparency by which we issue debt, starting the first ever Land Trust Investment Board, finding a pay-for-success model in education. This contrasts with Congressman Polis, who has chosen to spend a decade of his life as a legislator in Congress, has passed a solitary 2 pieces of legislation in a decade, esoteric land swaps, and has chosen to vote with Nancy Pelosi 94% of the time. And I think Coloradans need a governor who is willing to be more bipartisan than 6% of the time. Every single initiative that I have worked with in the treasurer's office has had broad bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats, and we have passed consequential economic policy pieces of legislation. What we have not done is made empty government promises which saddle the taxpayers and businesses with debt from which there is no relief other than a taxpayer-funded bailout.
A couple of fire-round questions to break things up here. Mr. Polis, you'll get a first stab at these 3. Have you climbed a Colorado 14er?
No.
What was your first job?
Selling tomatoes I grew at a tomato stand.
All right. Were they any good?
Oh, homegrown, absolutely delicious.
You have any advice for the Broncos right now?
I think they need to run more. More running game.
Always back to the running game, right? All right. Mr. Stapleton, have you climbed a 14er?
Yes.
Which one?
Capitol Peak.
All right. And what was your first job?
Newspaper delivery route.
I joke as a former TV news anchor that newspaper delivery is throwing yesterday's news into my bushes today. The last,
that a lot.
yeah, I'm sure. Do you have any advice for the Broncos?
Pass more.
There is a clear choice in this election, people. Mr. Stapleton, you'll have the first crack. 2 minutes to answer a question about transportation submitted by Dr. Cog. Transportation is a major concern across the state, obviously, and whether it's congestion, deferred maintenance, or safety, there are significant unfunded needs. This includes highways and local streets, urban and rural transit, and other multimodal projects. Funding at both the state and local levels has not kept pace with the growth in population and miles traveled. So what is your plan to address these needs facing the state and local governments throughout Colorado?
Well, transportation would be my #1 priority as governor. Everybody feels the impacts of transportation. I disagreed strongly with Shailen Bhatt when he was the head of the CDOT 2 years ago, and he told me that the department was planning on spending $150 million of taxpayer money on new offices for bureaucrats instead of new roads for all of us. And he said, I don't care if you disagree, I don't have to have your approval, and he was right. But I thought that it set the tenor of the debate on transportation on the wrong foot, that new offices for bureaucrats are more important than new roads for all of us. I support bonding for roads because I welcome the challenge to put the onus of responsibility on government to find the money to fix our roads over the long term. And that's why I've come up with 4 dedicated sources of revenue. Number one, the state's economist says we will have hundreds of extra millions of dollars as a result of the federal tax plan. In Colorado's budget, I want to use as much of that money to go to roads as possible. I've talked about how Colorado spends more per mile than 8 other mountain states. I want to open up the books on CDOT for all of us as Coloradans to understand why that is and to make the department ultimately operate more efficiently, because if we kept our spending in line with 8 other mountain states on our cost per mile, we could have an extra $150 to $160 million for bonding for roads in the future. I've talked about taxing sports gambling. The American Gaming Commission has said sports gambling is a $150 billion national business. I think it will be $1 billion plus business in Colorado. I think we should tax it at 15%. And I finally talked about fixing a broken regulatory model around medical marijuana, where it's easier for an 18-year-old kid to get a medical card than it is to get a library card or a 6-pack of beer. Not making a value judgment, but in some counties we have a 50% price disparity between medical and retail marijuana. And if you ask law enforcement, they're dealing with the unintended consequences of legalization, where there are illegal grows going on with medical cards. And then once you have a medical card, you can have 98 plants. They're shipping those plants to Jersey or North Carolina and taking advantage of a price arbitrage. So that's what I would do. Thank you.
Again, a transportation question here. What's your plan to address the needs facing state and local governments throughout Colorado, Mr. Polis?
You know, anybody who drives in Colorado, that certainly includes me, probably almost all of you, know the high cost of doing nothing, right? Not only the $600 a year in lost productivity on average that we each experience, time away from family and friends, which is priceless, right? So we need to do a better job making we build out our 21st century infrastructure. We do have a difference on this, Walker and I oppose 109. I think it's very dangerous for the state to take on billions of dollars of debt without a dedicated funding source. And I can tell you right now, that money's coming from schools. It's coming from, we won't be able to move forward with full-day kindergarten if 109 were to pass. And especially in weak budgetary years, would really threaten the fiscal stability of the state. So I certainly encourage people to vote no on 109. I applaud the efforts of the Chamber and others to find a dedicated funding source for transportation. It is appropriate to have that discussion to find a way to make sure that we can bond off of some revenue source. Not these, minor ones that Walker's talked about. I mean, I don't think we disagree on sports betting, but we ran the numbers, and it would take 600 years for sports betting to be able to pay for the roads and infrastructure that we need today. The marijuana money is spoken for. It goes to school capital construction. Doesn't mean we couldn't, if the voters wanted, amend the Constitution. But again, it's not enough to actually do it. A broad-based revenue mechanism as a dedicated funding source to fund our roads and infrastructure and bond off of is the most appropriate way to go. And ultimately, it's a competitiveness issue. We're not going to remain competitive as a state for our small businesses or for our large businesses if our quality of life deteriorates and businesses can't attract and retain the people they need to fill good jobs because they simply can't get to work or afford to live in a way close enough to commute. We want to look at increased rail options for commuting with both RTD and other potential special districts. We want to look at bus rapid transit, bike commuting, as well as expanding lanes. I've worked to deliver federal funding for the Highway 36 project and Tiger Grants, and I've worked in the 2nd Congressional District in Loveland and Fort Collins to deliver, bringing the federal government funding to the table around Highway 25 North.
Okay, well, this is going to be a challenge for both of you gentlemen. We're talking about healthcare. You have 2 minutes to explain your plan for healthcare in Colorado. Mr. Polis, you'll have the first crack.
Well, I'm excited about the opportunity to innovate and reduce costs in healthcare. When I talk to small businesses across the state, it's usually the number 1 or number 2 topic of concern of the high cost of healthcare. I've seen that firsthand. Having created jobs, met payroll, administered benefits, I've seen not only the cost of money, but the cost in time to small business owners, and as well as large business owners. We can do better here in Colorado. First of all, we can save money on Medicaid by implementing a bundle payment system like Arkansas has done, which has recognized 20 to 30% savings. Effectively, it's applying a Kaiser-type model towards Medicaid money. We're going to need to take on the high cost of prescription drugs. This is significant. This moves the bar. This is 25% of healthcare costs. It's not just your out-of-pocket. It's what we pay on prescription drugs that's reflected in higher insurance rates for small businesses and individuals. We need better pricing transparency. There's no excuse for insulin to have gone up 1,000% in the last 15 years. There's no excuse for the fact that you're getting ripped off on prescription drugs and paying 5 to 8 times as much as other countries. We want to use our negotiating leverage in the exchange in Medicaid, and yes, potentially working with other states to have a larger pool to be able to negotiate for better prescription drug rates, which will generate savings across the entire system as well. We also want to make sure that we invest in telemedicine. When we talk about rural broadband and high-speed internet, we can have cost reductions through telemedicine, expanding scope of care. Met some folks from St. Anthony here working on the behavioral health side and the mental health side, making sure we have better compliance with treatment, better health outcomes, better access to mental health services no matter where you live, result in lower costs and better physical health outcomes as well.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. 2 minutes for you, Mr. Stapleton, to explain your plan for healthcare in Colorado.
Well, I would encourage people to check out our website so I don't have to spend 2 minutes explaining it, but we've talked about improving access and affordability to healthcare, more competition in the marketplace for young Coloradans, especially in western Colorado where we have 14 of 64 counties which have one choice of healthcare provider. We have young people that are paying more for their health insurances than they are for their home mortgages or for their rent. We have counties in Colorado that have seen premium increases of 70% over the last 3 years. I was proud to join with Governor Ritter to defeat a state-run healthcare system 2 years ago. I do have a severe disagreement with Congressman Polis because his state-run healthcare system is more expensive than the one Governor Ritter and I defeated 2 years ago. And he knows it, and everyone knows it, including Vermont, which tried this 3 years ago and had to bail on it because it would have resulted in a double-digit payroll tax increase on businesses and a double-digit income tax increase. Congressman Polis' counterpart in New Mexico, who's the Democratic nominee for governor, said the math and numbers just don't work on the congressman's health care plan. The Mercatus Center, who did run the numbers at the federal level, found out it would be $32 trillion. So $32 trillion divided by 50 might end up being Colorado's share. This would bankrupt the state of Colorado. It would send businesses packing. It would send rural doctors who are already we already have a shortage of leaving Colorado. It would result in longer lines. I too want transparency in pricing. Lang Sias, my running mate, passed emergency room transparency, but in terms of prescription drugs, that's a regurgitated policy idea out of Vermont that they tried 3 years ago with Canada, and Canada doesn't want to agree to it, and the United States would have to agree to it, and Congressman Polis knows it, so it's just an empty talking point. I would love to lower the cost of prescription drugs for my kids and Colorado families, but I actually want to work on pragmatic ways that we can improve access, affordability, and competition in our healthcare, not drive our system over the cliff with a state-run system that we cannot undertake in Colorado and would leave the most vulnerable in long lines and most exposed to life-threatening illnesses.
We're going to discuss water. Possibly the largest long-term problem facing Colorado's economy is the sufficiency of our water supply. If the coming winter is as dry as the previous, an already bad drought will equal or beat the record dry spells we have on record. We now also have to worry about a call on the Colorado River from lower basin states as well, which will of course impact the entire state. So how will you implement Colorado's water plan, and will your priority be more storage, more conservation, or both? Mr. Stapleton?
Well, I went to Colorado's Water Congress about 2 months ago, and I said that in order to meet our goals, water is the lifeblood of Colorado's future. And in order to meet our goals, we need to fully fund Colorado's water plan. I will make sure it's a budget priority, not just next year, but in all years that I'm serving as governor. We need to invest in greater storage, and we need to invest in cleaning existing tanks to get 15 or 20% more capacity. And we need to protect the energy industry, because the energy industry is the largest source of our recurring revenues for water conservation efforts in Colorado from the money that they bring through the Department of Natural Resources. This is in contrast to Congressman Polis's plan. He went to the Water Congress and said, we need to look at alternatives to storage. I don't know what that means. He said that he wasn't for cleaning out existing tanks, and his past support for a 2,000-foot setback for the energy industry would take away 230,000 jobs and $32 billion of annual economic impact that the energy industry provides, and it would take away the largest recurring revenue source we have through the Department of Natural Resource for water conservation efforts. So that is a difference. Thank you.
Quick yes or no on this. Arizona, Nevada, and California have introduced tax rebate programs for residents who install artificial turf instead of natural grass. Is that a measure that you would entertain?
Sure. If somebody wants to put AstroTurf on their house, who am I to say
Would
that
you
they
entertain
shouldn't
a
work?
tax rebate for that?
Maybe. Yeah, it certainly seems like it would save water. I mean, water's a finite resource. Anybody who lives in the metro area knows if you want your lawn or AstroTurf to be a putting green, you're going to pay through the nose through Denver Water. So, yeah, incentivizing people to use less water makes sense.
Great. Mr. Polis, let's talk about water. How will you implement Colorado's water plan? And will your priority be more storage, more conservation, or both?
So, as you know, my opponent spends more time talking about what I don't believe than what he believes. To be clear, on healthcare, I think we're spending too much. I think we should spend less. I don't support anything that spends more. We spend too much, twice the percentage of our GDP of any industrialized nation. We need to spend less. The last thing we need to do is throw more money at a broken system. Look, with regard to water, I support Governor Hickenlooper's statewide water plan. We did a great job, this multi-stakeholder way of bringing together Western Slope, Front Range, businesses, ag, communities, around a cohesive plan that identifies the need for the water infrastructure, not only for where we are today, but for where our state will be in 10 or 20 years. It will fall to the next governor to find the funding. The state water plan includes, of course, storage. I do hope that through innovation, we can find additional low-hanging fruit around conservation and best practices, both in ag, rewarding farmers for more water-efficient crops and making sure they can benefit from not use it or lose it water policies. We have alternative transfer mechanisms and other ways that farmers can do that, as well as looking at innovative technology in the suburban and urban subdevelopments to make sure that that we can have more water-efficient practices without sacrificing any part of our quality of life. I've long fought to protect the rights for Colorado that originates here. In northern Colorado, I've represented headwater communities like Grand County, areas like Denver Water and Aurora Water have claims like Summit and Eagle County. We work very well with our water districts, as well as having represented growing communities. It really takes everybody working together and getting on the same page to be able to make sure that we fund our water infrastructure needs, not only of where our state is today, but for where our state will be in the future.
And would you, as we just asked Mr. Stapleton, agree to consider the idea of a tax rebate for folks who would rather put AstroTurf rather than natural grass?
No.
Mr. Stapleton, fire round questions here. What's the proudest moment in your life?
The birth of my 3 kids.
Moments, I should have pluralized that. What is your favorite restaurant in Colorado?
Big Bill's Pizza.
Sounds pretty good. Where's your favorite Colorado vacation spot?
I would say taking the kids to Rocky Mountain National Park or Durango.
Same questions for you, Mr. Polis. Proudest moment in your life?
The birth of my kids.
Your favorite restaurant in Colorado?
Chipotle.
And your favorite Colorado vacation spot?
Salida.
Great answers. All right, Mr. Polis, you'll have the first crack here at a sales tax simplification question. Colorado has a convoluted, complicated sales tax system with over 750 taxing districts, statutory and home rule jurisdictions. What steps would you do to support simplifying that system?
Oh my goodness, we really need to simplify our tax code. And by the way, so I was very clear and unambiguous, the last thing we need are more tax credits, whether it's for AstroTurf or anything else. We actually want to go after existing ones to reduce your income tax and small business tax. We're at 4.63% tax. We've run through the numbers. There's about $1.6 billion in tax expenditures and loopholes. We certainly don't need more, and in fact, we need less. And if we curtail some of those, we can get your rate down to about 4.2 or 4.3%. And that's going to be our goal, to reduce we have a unified rate in our state, as you know, whether it's individual income, corporate income, capital gains, dividends, to go from 4.63 to 4.2 or 4.3, significant reduction. Let's say it's a 5% reduction. Obviously, that increases the valuation of every business in Colorado, because valuation is based on post-tax future expected earnings. I think it would attract capital to Colorado on the margins. So we're very excited about lowering our tax rates. We also need to consolidate. Yes, now it's hard in our state, Jim. That's the hard part, because when you have all these special districts, obviously school districts, fire districts, development districts, they all actually have to vote on consolidation. So it's not easy. It's a tough challenge. But we would love to work with Republicans and the Democrats in the legislature to create a framework for tax district consolidation that makes people whole. Obviously, nobody is going to want their money to go to another district that didn't vote on it. But I think if we can find a way to make those adjustments, we can reduce administrative overhead, reduce small business overhead by having to deal with so many districts. It's a bold goal, and frankly, it'll take support from both sides of the aisle if we have ever any chance of realizing that.
Great. Same question to you, Mr. Stapleton. What steps would you do to take to support simplifying the tax system?
Well, Colorado has a time-honored tradition of home rule, but we also have one of the most convoluted, complex sales tax systems of any state in the country. And different counties have different ways of collecting taxes. And there have been bipartisan efforts to use technology, which I fully support, to improve the user experience, in this case the business experience, on the front end, and have the communities all take part in it. So in the back end, money can be distributed on a county-specific complicated manner, but for the business that is actually paying the sales tax, we can do a much better user-friendly job of applying it, and those are efforts I would support as governor.
Let's talk oil and gas for a moment. The issue of setbacks for oil and gas has come up in each election cycle for the past number of years. This cycle, both of you are on the record opposing Proposition 112, which would require 2,500-foot setbacks for oil and gas drilling. So would you, as governor, and this goes to Mr. Stapleton, propose any additional regulations on the oil and gas industry? If so, what would those be?
Well, it's important to note that just a few years ago we had 100-foot setbacks in Colorado. We moved to 300-foot setbacks, then we moved to 500-foot setbacks, and we have 1,000-foot setbacks for high-density commercial areas of business and schools, and that seems to be a workable system. We have had a bipartisan One Colorado energy policy that every governor from Roy Romer to Governor Hickenlooper has supported, Republicans and Democrats alike. We have worked collaboratively with the energy industry on some of the most stringent regulations of the industry in the entire country. We have taken a collaborative approach to mapping after the tragedy. We've taken a collaborative approach to capping orphan wells, and I would continue that approach because the energy industry is inextricably linked to the future that all of us want in Colorado. It's one of the three largest industries we have. It provides 230,000 jobs and $32 billion of economic impact. This is different than Congressman Polis, who bankrolled 3 years ago an energy setback that the governor had to beg him to take off the ballot. The governor has called his energy plan pretty radical, Governor Hickenlooper, and this is not a way that we would collaboratively work with one of the most important energy contributors to Colorado's growth and future.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Mr. Polis, would you as governor propose any additional regulations on the oil and gas industry?
Well, I want to, of course, point out the folks that my opponent has lauded, including Roy Romer, Bill Ritter, John Hickenlooper. They all support me and are campaigning very actively for me to be the next governor. Yeah, I have supported greater setbacks as a backstop for where there's no surface use agreement in place. I think it's very important that our operators reach agreement with the surface owner, whether it's a homeowner or a farmer. It affects the livelihood for many farmers in Weld County, right? So the location of the pad, if it interferes with their pivot, or there's an access road where there shouldn't be one, it can interfere with their primary means of support. So I strongly support the use of surface use agreements, and I support making sure that our local communities have a seat at the table in making decisions that impact our quality of life, including how and where and when active fracking operations are done. That exists today, to be clear, but much of it exists in a legal gray area, and it often winds up being fought in a courtroom rather than having it better defined in statute. I can work with any industry to create jobs. I work with Governor Hickenlooper on an oil and gas task force, which moved the ball forward. I'm proud to be supported by the pipe fitters and the electrical workers, many of the men and women that work in oil and gas, and I strongly support better worker safety provisions and better safety provisions for homeowners. We need to make sure that we put health and safety first, and work with any industry, including oil and gas and any industrial use of land, to make sure that we can grow our economy in a way that doesn't threaten our health and safety.
Now the moment a lot of folks in the audience have waited for, me to stop asking questions and each of you have a shot. So, Mr. Polis, you'll have one question. Mr. Stapleton, you'll have a minute to answer the question raised by Mr. Polis.
So I was going to ask, you said on a number of occasions that we spend too much on schools already and not enough on prisons. You're putting forward an education plan that would further reduce public education funding, namely private savings accounts for tutors, obviously money coming out of our schools to fund that. How can teachers, students, and parents trust you to do right by our public schools, which serve 90% of the kids in our state, when you have some of these extreme policies?
Well, thanks, Congressman Polis. I've worked with Tom Boasberg in our largest school district, DPS, to make sure that we have competition in public education in Colorado for my kids and for yours and for all Colorado kids. I've talked a lot about how we have an education finance problem, though, that we need transparency and accountability across our 178 school districts, not just for me or for you, but for every parent in the room here, or anybody that is a taxpayer, is an investor, whether they like it or not, in the future of education. And yet we have some school districts where parents cannot get information to understand why student population has gone down, why teacher population has gone down by double digits, and yet administrative costs have gone up by 40% since 2011 in some school districts. In fact, we actually ran the numbers and took a numbers-based approach and found out that if we held the growth of students and teachers in check with administrative growth across Colorado's 178 school districts from 2011 on, in some school districts we would have nearly $4,000 more to pay teachers. That's not an empty promise of free, that's actually a promise that works for Colorado's families.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. It is your shot. You have a question now to pose to Mr. Polis.
Congressman, I've asked you on many occasions about my friend Martin, who is originally from Mexico. He's been in the United States now for more than a decade. He just bought a second home in Henderson. He took his kids to the beach for the first time, went to Disneyland. You have said that you want to make his job obsolete in the future in Colorado. You've supported anti-fracking initiatives, anti-pipeline initiatives that would put him out of work. And in response to what you would say to him, you point out that you're endorsed by the pipeliners, which is a union, and also other unions related to the energy industry. But none of that will replace Martin's job for him. You've talked about rigging the system to get to 100% renewables, even though we spent $1.3 trillion globally on renewables, and they still represent less than 3% of the world's energy production, even though over the last 60 years, fossil fuels have represented 83% consistently of energy production. What do you say to Martin? How do you replace his lost job and the 100,000 other Latinos who work in the energy industry in Colorado, Congressman?
Well, I was hoping to meet Martin up in Greeley. I think he said he was up in that area when we had our recent forum up there. I made 2 pitches to him already. I don't think he's in the room, but hopefully we can show him this video because I'm hoping to get his vote. I know he'll be making up his decision soon. It's Pipe Fitters, by the way, is the name of the union that represents many of the folks that work in oil and gas and the pipeline side, the electrical workers. Of course, I want to put worker safety first, home safety first, and then our business community in terms of making sure that we make decisions that encourage all of our growth. As we move towards our renewable energy future in Colorado, we'll be even more of an energy exporter. We already are today, but as we power our own grid with less expensive clean energy, we'll be able to export even more. Excel tells me that already today, new wind energy costs 20% less than existing coal energy. So unless you're willing to subsidize or prop up coal or charge ratepayers and businesses more, we're going to continue to invest in clean, less expensive renewable energy, creating good green jobs that will never be outsourced.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We now move to closing remarks. Mr. Polis will have the opportunity to go first. 2 minutes from the podium if you'd like, and after those closing remarks, you're welcome to exit the stage and get after that lunch.
Well, it's great to be here in Jefferson County. I've been honored to represent much of unincorporated Jefferson County and U.S. Congress, to have worked closely with my good friend and colleague who's actively, of course, campaigning for me, Ed Perlmutter. what a tribute to Jefferson County as really one of our most effective legislators at the national level. Look, I'm looking forward to innovating. I believe there's no problem that we face that the promise of the future and innovation can't solve, whether it's saving money on healthcare, whether it's making sure that kids are prepared for jobs in an emerging 21st century economy, whether it's implementing better access to rural broadband and internet connectivity. And that doesn't just mean, as you know, areas that we refer to as rural. That means here in Jefferson County. I have constituents today in Conifer or in Evergreen, just outside of the downtown area. It's very hard to get high-speed internet access, not only improving access to telemedicine, but also enabling telecommuting across the skills continuum, right? Getting cars off our roads, allowing people to telecommute from their home, whether it's one day a week, which could reduce traffic 20% if people do that, or even people that permanently telecommute from home. I'm excited about making the future work for you. I see that as the challenge that I will own and convene Republicans, Democrats, Independents, the business community to do. We know that things are changing. Technology is changing. The world is changing. The skills that are needed for good jobs are changing. The nature of work itself is changing, with many people working 2 or 3 part-time jobs rather than the traditional 30-year career in one job with a pension. The challenge of the next governor and the challenge of Colorado, we need to be the very best state to make these changes work for the people who live here. How can we make sure that people have retirement security, have healthcare security and pay less for healthcare, have great education for their kids, protect, in the face of growth, our parks, our open space, our public land, which are such an integral part of our identity as Coloradans and part of our quality of life. As your governor, I'll work tirelessly every day to do that. I humbly ask for your vote. You can find out more at polisforcolorado.com. Thank you.
Mr. Stapleton, 2 minutes for closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much for having me to the Jefferson Chamber. I want to make sure that Colorado is still a place that young people want to move from both coasts. But I don't want to be California. I don't want to be California because California has the highest poverty rate of any state in the country. California is the state that tells you what doctor to choose, how to turn on your lights at night, how to heat your homes. And California is the state that has made so many empty government promises that they have regulated every aspect of individual freedom in life. That's not the Colorado I know and love. The Colorado I know and love is a libertarian Colorado that keeps government small, out of our lives, that empowers individuals to recognize their economic hopes and dreams. It's why we've put out plans to fix our transportation system, to improve access and affordability to health care, to make sure that we can make promises to the Colorado public worker that we can afford to make and aren't just making empty promises on paper. Because the thing about government promises is that as the government promises list gets greater, your household budget gets tighter. And free is really expensive. And this contrasts to Congressman Polis, who has unapologetically promised $90 billion in costs or spending. Let me break it down for you. The budget in Colorado, $30 billion. $20 billion comes from all of us as taxpayers in this room through sales tax and state income tax, $10 billion from the feds for Medicaid expansion. If you were unapologetically promising to triple the size of state government, here's the bad news. Only 2 ways to do it. You either tax individuals through the roof, or alternatively, you regulate the business community through fees legislatively. Either one of those makes Colorado a really bad place to live and work in the future. And it is not a Colorado I want for my future or for yours. Congressman Polis will be campaigning this week, Wednesday and Thursday, with Bernie Sanders. He was asked at CSU campus on Saturday, is there one single solitary policy difference between yourself and Senator Sanders? And he said no. And so I don't think that Coloradans, I'll find out in a couple weeks, I don't think Coloradans want to elect Bernie Sanders as their next governor. Coloradans want to elect a governor who will empower individual and spread individual freedom. Thank you.
Mr. Stapleton, Mr. Walker, we want to Mr. Stapleton, Mr. Polis, thank you both. You guys can go and get after your lunch now if you'd like. That wraps us up. And we do appreciate the civility. The discourse has been fantastic. Obviously, we all certainly have an opportunity to vote in just a couple of weeks, and these gentlemen have a very full schedule, so it is great that they were able to carve out an hour and a half and spend that with us today. One more round of applause for our candidates. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. We'd also like to thank Dr. Cog again and all of our table sponsors that have you seen scrolling across the screen. Of course, we want to thank all of you for joining us today. Remember, fill out your ballot, send it in. Thank you again for joining us today.